to talk about a little bit is some of the, I don't want to say hottest ticket items, but the items that I received a lot of emails about in between the last time we gave a report in February and the end of the session. And then Rep. Scott, I'm sure we'll go into a few more details about certain bills, but we really enjoy his questions, so I'll keep it kind of brief and then we'll just do some questions if I brought my notes here. Sitting on the Transportation Committee, one of the things that we hear a lot about, and it's kind of annoying in one sense, is license plates. We have the opportunity as a legislature to approve or deny personalized license plates, not the ones where your name would be on there, but we have the L for Fish and Wildlife and Bluebird and things like that. But every year since we've been in there, people promote different organizations through the legislating license plates. And actually one of the first bills I ran was for the Friends of the NRA license plate. I was a freshman, they said, hey, give it to the freshmen. And I thought this will be easy. But there is a lot of angst within the legislature about running license plates. A lot of people don't like it, and the longer I've been there and seen this, I have a little bit of that angst now too. It's just, it seems like they're taking state funds and directing them to somebody's private organization, if you will. But that's not truly the case. It's roughly $12 that you pay for that license plate. $7 of it goes to the state. The state actually makes money on producing those, and the other $5 goes to the organization. But it still is kind of the state taking a role that most people in the legislature don't like. But again, this year, we had a few come up. One of them was for Purple Heart recipients, to be able to renew that license plate and keep that one going. It had already been there, but it also kind of expanded who could get that Purple Heart license plate. And that was great. It sailed right through. The second one was for Rotary International, which is a great organization, but as you read the bill, it was only directing these funds specifically at the Ada County Rotary International. We were asking questions, and they said, oh, no, we'll be sure to spread this money out to the whole state, we promise you. And somebody asked, well, what about the international organization? Oh, well, the international gets some also. So money that Idaho citizens would be paying was going to basically stay in Ada County with the promise that they would distribute it to the other organizations and then going to the international organizations. And some things that Rotary supports, there were members on the committee that weren't too happy with it. It did sneak out of the committee. It was kind of funny. We had a roll call vote, and the chairman actually made a mistake and stopped it before we were done, and it got out of committee, but it died on the floor. It got through the House, died in the Senate on the floor. The next one was for the Humane Society specifically, and it was called a pet-friendly license plate. A gentleman down there named High Clock has been trying for years to get this license plate through, and High was ill this year. He had a substitute the whole year, so there's a little bit of emotion wrapped up in this. One of his Democrat seatmates decided to run this bill for him, had a cute little cat and a golden retriever on it, and it was pet-friendly. Came out of committee again, came to the floor, and it didn't pass the House floor. But this was something I received a lot of attention about, and maybe it was because I was on the Transportation Committee. I don't know if Rep. Scott did, but there were a lot of people that wanted this pet-friendly license plate, and then why on earth did I vote against it? Well, there's a lot of things the Humane Society does that don't completely integrate with what Idaho wants, and it's specifically agriculture. They're against a lot of the agricultural practices that we have, and I think that's what drove a lot of folks within the legislature not to vote for this. So that one failed also. But those two, be it Rotary and the pet-friendly license plate, were two things I received a lot of email about. Another one was a bill on domestic violence. It was to strengthen some laws, and specifically to restrict gun ownership for men who had been accused of domestic violence. If they had a domestic violence charge before, they were going to restrict their gun ownership. Now it was for 2 years, so that's, if you want to say that's better, it wasn't for the lifetime, but if you were just accused of assault, which is not violent, it's just speaking, that even that misdemeanor charge would mean that you would lose your right to own a gun for that period of time. And there's a lot of heart-wrenching testimony that you hear of women and children who were victims of a man who had a gun and would put it to their head and threaten them further with domestic violence that you want to protect. We want to protect those people, but this was just a little too expansive in reaching into that individual right of gun ownership at that point. So that failed, but that was another one a lot of emails about. There was a school safety bill. Representative Pat McDonald was tightening up some, well, in their opinion, tightening up laws about threats made outside of school and regarding people within the school. So it wasn't just on school grounds, but if you said something off of school grounds or on the internet, and then had what was termed a deadly weapon. I almost said weapons of mass destruction this morning. Not quite right, a little less than that, but a deadly weapon, then you could be convicted of this threat against a school or another person. And what this legislation did, and why I voted against it, is it restricted a pocket knife, essentially. Currently in our laws, your children are allowed to carry pocket knives, and in rural areas, many do. But this took that out, blades under 3 inches or something to that effect. And this made it stricter that if you were to have a moment of anger, if you will, like print something online and somebody saw it and then show up to school with a pocket knife, you could be charged at that point with this threat. And it became a felony, was the other thing. It was a felony. So I didn't like that. I voted against it. It did make it through. The Senate went through, and that's now law. So that might be something that we have to readdress because of the severe restrictions upon that also. The last one was called the trespass bill. We tried to change that term to the property rights bill because when people are trespassing on other people's property, right now the onus is on the property owner to make sure that that doesn't happen, having to post signs and go and find out who's doing this or how it's operating. This puts the onus on the person doing the trespassing. It protects the property owners more. First offense, the bill got rewritten in the Senate. It was a lot more strict. It was $500. Right now it's $50. So often when they're calling the sheriff to come help, the sheriffs don't have time to do this. It's not really worth their time necessarily to go investigate these trespassing. We heard from a lot of property owners, farmers, timber owners up in our district. A lot of vandalism goes on. People stealing fuel at your outbuildings if you're storing bulk fuel, fishing on your property or hunting without permission. A lot of different things that needed to be addressed. So we're happy to put that onus on the trespasser, if you will. It was a misdemeanor, first charge, $500 fine. Second one is a misdemeanor, $1,000, and then it jumped up to a felony. If you were convicted the third time, it became a felony. There was about 4 bills that went in the felony direction, so those are 2 of them, and people were starting to get a little nervous about the felony charge issue there. I was working on human trafficking legislation that would have made it a felony to purchase a prostitute first time. That didn't go anywhere because of that felony charge, and a lot of legislators were nervous about that. But this...
We are live!
Now I'm turning red. No implication of legislation purchasing prostitutes. I don't know, we'll have to...
We're live, honey, I'm sorry.
Not an implication that any legislators were purchasing prostitutes. Just the fact that we were making it a felony and the strength of a felony charge. And that if it was more of a youthful indiscretion rather than seeing it as a protection for young ladies or people involved in the sex trafficking industry, essentially is what we were trying to do. I'm going to get away from that topic. Thank you, Sherry, for being here. I've lost my train of thought. Okay, so that made some people nervous, but actually that felony part stuck. And what they did, though, is the first offense is now a citation and is $300, but it still ramps up. If you continue to trespass and are convicted of it, then the penalties are getting stiffer. Law enforcement has an opportunity to get some of that fund, so they have a little more incentive to go out and actually take care of this and to protect the property. So that was a good bill that came through. We just received notice, or our new budget report, that we are $15 million over estimated revenue within March alone. And that puts us at roughly $164 million annually at this point. And so our economy is still roaring. A lot of that is personal income tax. There was additional sales and corporate income tax that came in that. Half of that money goes directly into the Budget Stabilization Fund, our rainy day fund. The other half is what goes to roads. It's the Strategic Initiatives Index that we put in when we did the fuels tax increase. So roughly $63 million will be divided between the state and local jurisdictions just at this point, only in March, to help get that backlog of roads done. And we had some tax relief for the citizens, which is important as we continue to have our budget growing. And going forward, because this economy is still roaring and we're bringing more people into it, we should be able to look at that some more. Congressman Labrador, should he become governor, has a plan to what he calls the 5-5-5 plan, and that would be a 5% personal income tax rate, 5% corporate, and then lowering the sales tax to 5% also. So as the money keeps coming in to the state, we can see additional decrease in those tax burdens. Lord willing, it still has to go through the legislative process, of course, but that's a good way to return the money to the citizens when it's still going in there. Thank you. I know we're going to take questions, and Representative Scott is going to, I'll take a question now if you want, Larry.
How does the repeal of the food tax look in your view?
Okay, I'm sorry, I should have addressed that. I think there's a very good opportunity that we will be able to repeal the tax on groceries next year. That was part of the push against trying to add that, and Rep. Scott can maybe talk to that more since she was involved more than I was in trying to push that onto this tax relief bill that we had. But the promise was all three of the major gubernatorial candidates have said they want to repeal that grocery tax. So I think it'll be one of the first pieces of legislation that we'll see, regardless of who wins, coming out and doing that. Okay, I'm happy to take more questions. Can we wait till Rep. Scott's done and then we can both answer questions? Great, thank you very much.
So now you know it's not just me that can say the wrong words. But my face doesn't get that red. So thanks for coming out today. I appreciate it, and I hope you all stay for the debate coming up. I think that's going to be great. I'm just going to touch briefly on more specifics. So overall, there were 799 pieces of legislation that were proposed this year. Of that, 561 bills were introduced through the committee system. And of that, 355 bills will actually turn into law come July 1st of this year. Administrative rules and regulations, you always get my updates and hear all about that. We had 191 dockets, and dockets are like packets of lots of changes. Overall, 1,478 pages were passed of rules and regulations. What you don't know about that is many of those reference the federal code and our volumes and volumes of code being put right into our state law through reference to the federal law. We only rejected of 175 of the pending rules, the individual rules, 5% of them were rejected, so about 95% of all that was passed. There are just a few minor things, and I can touch on those if we have time. I wanted to just get right into the bills and some of the bills that passed through the committees, and actually are going to be turned into law, just to give you an overall. Obviously, I can't hit all 355 of them, so I'm going to just concentrate on some of the big ones I thought. Under agriculture, Representative Dixon touched on the property rights bill. This is a trespass bill. This is a great bill. There was a ton of controversy on this bill. If you might recall, and the radical environmental groups tried to sell this in a really bad way to citizens. So I encourage you to make sure you understand that. If we answer questions, if you have questions on that, we'll get into detail on that bill. Another bill that passed that will probably affect this area, planning and planning departments, you know, the planning and zoning for your county. Now they have, if a water, let's say they call it a water delivery entity, so these smaller water districts in that, they can request in writing that all zoning is, they have a request notice in writing of any proposed rezoning, subdivisions, or any other site-specific land developments. So this is going to be more accountability on the local planning and zonings for these water areas before all of a sudden they say, oh, we've developed your land and there's all this high-density housing, and by the way, you're going to have to provide the water for it. So this is a really, I think it's a really good bill. I don't recall it being a big controversial one that slipped through, but when I looked at the summary, I was like, oh, that's a great one that we did get passed. Crime victims. How many people get my newsletters? Read about Marcy's Law. Marcy's Law was a proposed constitutional change from a California billionaire that wanted to change our constitution to put in language about victims. And I couldn't understand, like, why is he pushing this so hard? And they've put millions of dollars into our state advertising this. They use bully tactics against us legislators, trying to get us to vote the right way. And I actually had legislators say, I don't agree with changing our constitution, but it is an election year, and I know it's going to be worse to vote against it. That's how much influence this group had. It passed our House But luckily, because it's a constitutional amendment, they have to get a supermajority, and they were 6 votes shy of that, which was great. But, so what we did is we kind of came up with an alternative plan to kind of counter that. That didn't really go anywhere except to counter it and say, well, there's other ways to do this, to change our constitution. We did pass a couple crime victim bills, because it was talked about heavily in the district, and so one of them is, right now, sexual assault victims, they have to pay for their own rape kits at the hospitals. I mean, who would have known that? And so, I mean, this is just an injustice, and so we passed a law that said, no, their insurance companies were billing them to prove that they were raped. And so we fixed that in the law. Also, we set it up so they have confidentiality with the Secretary of State, because most of the records are open. And so women that are, or anybody, victims of stalking, human trafficking, and malicious harassment, now they can keep their information private statewide, and that information won't be released. Civil asset forfeiture, we passed that bill this year, which is really good. You know, before, I don't know, obviously we have a good sheriff in our area. We don't have the abuse of the civil asset forfeiture as some of these other areas do. But before, even if you had a bunch of money, let's just say you took out $12,000 to go purchase a vehicle and you got caught with that money, they could confiscate all your stuff before. So we fixed some of that in the law. Breastfeeding exemption. There's no longer an obscenity to breastfeed in public. So I imagine you'll see a lot of that going on in Sandpoint. I don't know why, I just figured that's going to happen. Okay, I'm skipping, so I'll mention this one because this was my bill that passed. A bill to allow retired law enforcement officers that carry the 218 card. It's a special card. They get training every year, and they just stay current, and they get background checked every year. They can now carry, as of July 1st, in schools and in colleges. So like at these big events, and I'm glad that one passed, and I'm glad it was mine. So, one bill that passed is just, it's kind of a random, there's so many random topics, but if you see a child locked in a car and it's 100 degrees out, if you broke in to save that child, they could actually say you were criminally broke into their vehicle. So we exempted people that are saving someone. I mean, little things like that, you think, why do we need laws for that? But apparently, people are so happy these days. And so self-defense, stand your ground. We passed this stand your ground, or they call it the castle doctrine, to where the burden of proof is not as much on the homeowner now. If someone breaks into your home in the middle of the night, you have a lot more rights now. That it's, before you had to prove that they were intentionally trying to harm you, and a lot of legal stuff that comes up that you don't realize until it happens. Another bill that one of the Liberty folks has been trying to run for a couple years, that passed this year, was school districts firearm education. So what it does is it authorizes school districts to offer an elected firearms training, an education course for primary and secondary students. And this is something now that it's set up to do. The school can pick whatever curriculum it is, and it's now up to the local citizens to put pressure on their school boards that, hey, we want this training in our schools. And so it's a good opportunity to educate kids on guns and the proper use of them. Lots of bills. One bad bill that slipped through was a governor's bill. They called it the Idaho Opportunity Scholarship. Doesn't that sound great? The Liberty legislators called it the Dropout College Bill. But what it does, it takes money from kids that were getting scholarships for college, and it gives it to people that have maybe taken, I think 24 credits, but dropped out of school. It's giving it to the adults now instead of the students. That was the governor's bill, and he pushed it pretty hard. Okay, I'm going to get into election bills. This one seems like a no-brainer, but we passed a bill that prohibits the use of public funds to advocate for or against a candidate or certain ballot measures. So what this is saying is they can't use your tax money to lobby against you, or for, to lobby for or against a bond or levy. This has been going on in the state to where there's flyers going out. There's lots of different taxing districts that are guilty of this, and we passed a bill to stop that. Also, a bill was passed by Representative Nate. What it does, it requires the disclosure of the estimated average annual cost for a bond or levy. So, you know, when you're voting on a bond, maybe not levy, maybe just bond, but when you're voting on a bond, now it's going to tell you how much that's actually going to cost you if the bond passes, an annual cost for it. It's just more transparency when you're just, you know, yes or no on the ballot. You don't really know what you're getting yourself into sometimes. And then school board districts, for those of you that stay on top of all these school board elections, before it changes the date of school board elections from May odd number years to November odd number years. So right now, for the May elections, there's not many people showing up to vote for school board members. This is going to put it on a general election date, so hopefully there'll be a better turnout. Now, we shouldn't have to do that. People should always turn out and vote, but as we know, that doesn't always happen. State Controller's Office, there's a lot of changes going on in the executive branch, in the I don't know, I call it the internal guts of government, to where they're starting to digitalize a lot of things. You know, Idaho's kind of been behind the times. You're starting to realize that there's a real threat with data security. Lots of funding's kind of been funneled to the Secretary of State's office, the Controller's office, and to try to get payroll things consistent, to do a standardized security, and so that's kind of been going on overall. Lots and lots and lots of bills passed. Okay, open meeting laws. In the past, the executive branch has not had to follow the executive meeting laws, the open meeting laws that we do. So you know how they have to post your agendas online and it's open to the public? The executive branch has not been operating under those same rules. And we tried to pass a bill last year to force them to, and of course it failed. This year, it got passed. So now they're going to have to be open to the public, which is a big deal because there's a lot of, I don't want to say power, but there's a lot of control from that executive branch controlling all parts of government, legislative, judicial, everything. They're running the show pretty much. So that's good. And then something that will affect us locally, meeting agendas for government entities need to be posted online if that government entity has an online presence. So I realized this was going on last year. I thought, well, what are they going over in the county commissioner meeting? And I Googled it and got to the site, and I thought, the agenda's not here. Why isn't the agenda online? So for me in Blanchard, I would have to drive an hour to Sandpoint to go look on the bulletin board to see what was posted on the agenda. I thought, this is not good. So actually that part was mine. I put it into somebody else's bill. It wasn't my bill, it was her bill, and it was more on what she was looking to do that passed, and then we got that part in there, is when these county commissioner meetings are taking action on something, at the county commissioner meetings, they have to mark that as an action item. So it alerts citizens like, hey, we're gonna be expending money, we're going to make this big decision. So it's not just the daily business of the agendas, but it's like action items have to be marked so citizens know. Lots and lots of bills. I like trying to say, well, this one doesn't seem that big. Okay, so this is another one, public records requests. So we had to pass a law that provides that bonuses, severance packages, and other compensation are vouchered and unvouchered expenses for which reimbursement was paid to a public official are not exempt from disclosure. Right now, I think there was an issue with a superintendent somewhere that they're getting bonuses, but those bonuses, nobody knows how much they're getting. Well, that's your taxpayer money that you don't know, how much is my superintendent getting? Now that's going to have to be disclosed, which is a big deal. Okay, pro-life, and I'm skipping lots, just so you know. We passed two pro-life bills. The Abortion Reporting Act, it establishes reporting requirements for healthcare institutions and personnel for complications arising from abortions. So right now, if someone has an abortion, there's usually complications. Lots of times there's complications. These doctors just ignore the fact that maybe they had an abortion within 24 hours and they just look and say, oh, this lady is just all these problems, but they never mention that she just had an abortion, right? That's how they report it, to make it look like it wasn't a complication from abortion. This is requiring it to link it to that abortion, these issues. This will help be able, on the pro-life movement, to push back, because you're going to have evidence of the complications of abortion now on the record. And you're going to have more, I don't know what the terminology is. Ammunition. I like that. Ammunition to push back on this in our state. And then the other one is, we passed is, right now we allow chemical abortions in Idaho. It's sickening. And so they can just take a pill and kill their baby. And so what this bill does, there's apparently a second pill that if a woman takes it within 48 hours, then that she could reverse, the chances that the baby would live would be huge. And there was a lady that testified, and she had a 5-year-old child. I think there's been 500 or 600 kids that the parents decided to abort, and then they took this pill, the mom did, and then they could have the baby. So it is a viable way, and so the Planned Parenthood lobbies heavy down at the Capitol. I don't know if you saw the video. They harassed Senator Foreman. I heard they left condoms all over his desk, and these are these like 12 to 14-year-old girls that are picking fights with legislators, telling us they demand, what is it? Reproductive rights, protection, we should be paying for all this. I don't even go with all the emails I get. So, anyway, I've lost my train of thought here.
The bill.
Women's choice.
Oh, women's choice. I said, so you're saying that women have the choice to do an abortion, but they don't have the choice to change their mind and say, I'm going to take this recovery pill? So they are really misguided. And so anyway, all this bill does is says when a woman goes to get an abortion, she gets this packet of a bunch of information. This information is in her packet. It's not a big deal. She just at least knows it. If she's like at home crying or upset, she can look through the book and she's like, oh, she might have that as an option. Okay, passed a bunch of, or a couple bills on foster care, the foster care system, just some more oversight on the health and welfare, which is I don't even want to go down that road. Let's see, natural resources. Okay, fish and game road salvage. So right now you can pick up roadkill and you just have to report it to Fish and Game. Well, sometimes you might see an animal that's suffering in the road that's been hit by a car. In the past, you could not put that animal out of its misery. Now you can. Just a simple little bill that says, yeah, you can dispatch that animal. You still have to report if you take it, but that helps suffering animals. Specific up here, we have a Lake and River Commission. I don't know if you know, they meet monthly, I think, maybe, is it more than monthly? I don't. And anyway, we passed a bill that allows them to have a seat at the table for this Columbia River Treaty stuff. Maybe not a seat, but just to be involved in this process. They're renegotiating an international treaty. It's really going to affect Idaho and our dams and our waters. So that was kind of good for our area to have a seat at the table. What would be better is if we had good conservatives that got involved with this Water and Lake Commission, got on the board of this commission, and we have the right people there. Because as we know, it's whoever shows up and gets involved in these boards who control it. And so, okay, we did lower income tax. I'm almost done. More child credit. We went from $130 tax credit to a $205 child tax credit. They did this just to help because the big tax cut from the federal level really hurt big families. So this will help make up some of that cost. And we're almost done. Yeah, let's skip all those. Passed a resolution from the state. It was a joint memorial, and it basically said stating opposition to any new federal national monument designations or further designations of wilderness in the state of Idaho without the approval of Congress, as we know, and the Idaho legislature. It just tries to get more of the state involved in some of these decisions as our land is being locked up more and more. It really doesn't have a lot of teeth. A resolution basically just says, hey, here's what we like, here's an idea. Maybe we'll get some legislation with the right governor next year. We'll see. There's tons of other little things, tons of notes, but I think we'll open it up to questions and we can both answer and we'll go from there. So thanks for coming out. I do. If you don't get my newsletters, make sure you sign up, and then some of this I sent out, and I'll send this report out to you. If you don't have it, I'll get it for you as we start going.
On that, giving out pamphlets that talk about the reverse abortion bill.
Yep.
It would be sort of cool if on the back of the labeling of the abortion pill, they could write, can be reversed by such and such within so many hours. Right on that bottle or right on that packaging of the abortion bill.
Oh, yeah, that would be wonderful. That would be.
It's probably federal,
Yeah.
an FDA issue, because they would have to approve that pill to be used anyway, and that's, I think, where they require that labeling. I don't know if state, I don't think we could as a state, but it's an excellent bill. Right? Yes, you sir in the back of the hat.
Comment and question. My comment first is I'd like to thank both of you for your House Resolution 7 on the smelter, bringing that to the attention of the legislator that we do have a pending problem up here in Bond County, so thank you for that. Also, some clarification on the trespass bill. Can you clarify why the difference between a $50 fine and a $500 fine caused the law enforcement to get involved? Who's getting the money who was getting the money for the $50 fine, and why didn't the police come versus who gets it on the $500? And is that a motivating factor for them?
I don't know the specifics.
So the way it's set up, to my best understanding, and I might not be exactly right, but now if it's a civil, so someone trespasses and the cops say, you know what, we're not going to get involved in this one. When you sue, that money will go to you. The fine, if they get convicted of it, that fine will go to you, the property owner. If it is criminal trespass, then it will be, it will go to the police. It will go to the police, and actually some of that money will go to the investigation of the incident. And then I think we earmarked a little bit of that money will go to educating people on what the law is, what the posting requirements are, and all that.
So I just think we need to be careful that we're not allowing law enforcement to enforce laws based on how much money
I
they're
agree with that, but the biggest complaint we had, and I've seen it locally, I've actually had a personal experience, which would include you having a personal experience too. They really, it's just not worth their energies, or they're so busy or overstrapped with things to do that to go pursue something for a $50 fine, there might be something bigger or more important that they just really don't have the resources to deal with everything. And some of that, we live in a rural area and we kind of like it that way. So we have to be careful how much we expect of our police and how much we kind of just shake our heads and go, it's okay.
On that issue, on my property, I had 5 people on horseback that came out through my property. So would they be charged $50 a head? Well, see, they were on 10 horses. And it would add up to $500 for the 10. It would,
Each individual, and it's now not $50, it's $300. So,
so the police would come
the police would come,
if there was,
and you call them, and they would now have the law in place to pursue it.
because of the change in the law.
Because it's more,
But it's.
It becomes what a reasonable person would do also. So
Yeah.
if they just were misguided and happened to be on there, then
Yeah.
they're hoping you would understand and not want to press charges. And that's part of the parameters of it, is what a reasonable person would do. But if it's repeated and you've approached them, or if they're not seeking your permission to get on there, then that becomes different, where they would prosecute it at that point. I believe it is a per individual
Yeah.
charge on that. So, and that was a little bit of the concern I had, if there was a perverse incentive for a landowner. A gentleman in the southern part of the state has land, and he says high school children go up there and party sometimes. So it could be a money-making endeavor for him. As a joke, we were talking about this just in discussing the bill, that if you were to allow them to go up there, then say, hey, they're trespassing, and you're getting, $30,000 each time they're up there or something. But so, yeah. Yeah, Steve.
Might help with his question. Previous to this law going in, the police looked at it as the way the law was written, it was kind of in the trespasser's favor. And so it was almost like a waste of their time, because they know that nothing's coming of it. And unless something criminally has happened,
Right.
it's like,
So try to reverse those roles in this.
yeah, and this reverses that role. Now he can protect the landowner, and he has some bite.
And there is a mentality among many in this state, and many, I'll just say the environmentalists from out of state, that there should be no private property. They want to get rid of your private property rights, just like socialist countries. And so the pushback we had on this bill and the lies that were being presented to the public, I had good people that I know that don't break the law, and they were so upset that we were, doing this horrible law, and it's like, no, this is protecting you as a property owner.
There's a lot of misinformation that happens often. It said, if I wander onto your property, I'm going to be charged with a felony first time. And I had to say, please read the bill and show me where it says that.
Yeah.
Just to force them to go look into it, not argue, but that way they know what it's saying, because it didn't say that. But misinformation traveled pretty quickly with this. Sherry.
Didn't this have something to do with closing down all the roads and trying to force the property owner to allow an easement?
Not that I'm aware of, but I don't
You
know all
haven't
the
heard
details
that?
of it.
Okay. Well, I heard that. Have you heard that?
I haven't heard that. I did hear it was, at one point I heard it was the Koch brothers that were hiring lobbyists in the state, and then there were some other brothers. The problem is that we do have a problem, that there's this mentality that these big owners that have a lot of property, that people can just walk through their property. And it's not really the case. Private property is either private property or it's not. So what was the biggest problem is, I think there were 7 parts in our code, and our code is big, that address property, private or trespass. And there were different requirements in different parts of code, and even the Fish and Game admitted, maybe what we said is not exactly what's true, because says this over here. So there was no way, this basically put everything under one section of code and start clarifying it. There's probably going to be tweaks to it. It's not perfect, but it's really, at least it gets it all in one spot, so now we can look at it in total.
Monique?
But wasn't there also a part in there where it was a little bit more than just trespass? I mean, we've had friends with large pieces of property where the neighbor actually trespassed onto their property when they were logging, took some of their logs, they had to sue their neighbor over it, and they had to eat the cost of suing, where now they're actually able to recover the
Correct.
costs.
Yes.
Correct,
You're right.
thank you. I'm going to go to Ken, then we'll go to Jim, then Anita.
And he gets to pick.
Well, you're doing all the talking.
No.
I have a question about the governor's bill that you mentioned. I didn't understand what was going on.
So the governor always comes up with these bills, right? These are the governor's bills, and he was very vocal about it this year. These are my bills. He had the Medicaid expansion, he had the dropout college bill, and he had one other bill that passed, maybe 2 other
Well,
bills.
the tax relief was basically his proposal.
Right, he proposed. So, what was your
You
question?
mentioned the dropout.
Oh, Okay, so basically what that did is right now there's some fund set up for kids,
It's the opportunity scholarship.
opportunity scholarship, that they can apply for this scholarship for school, for further school. I don't know what the requirements are. They
It's
probably-
for going to college, so it's open to all Idaho students that are going to college, and I'll go into a little detail because it comes through the budget committee. Right now, it only served maybe a third of the students that could apply for it. So they were seeking to expand it so that every available student could get this money, and it was, I think a $5 million ask. And we, on the budget committee there, and I talked to the lady who carries most of the education budgets, so this is too much money, too broad, let's bring it down to about 2.5, because we want to help children go on, and that go on is a different argument, but help them have the opportunity to go to college and get an education if they want. Something worked its way in there in the process later on, and it went from 2.5 to 3.5 million, and all of a sudden they had this, what they term the adult completer scholarship, where you have adults who have achieved 12 credits, maybe it was 20 credits, 24, in college that have dropped out and stopped going, but that now can apply for that same pool of money to go back to college.
So now you have adults competing with students for this pot of money that was designed for students. It's just, I mentioned it in the other one, it's like our focus should be K through 12, and we're starting to shift that focus to, pumping money into these colleges, or pumping money into programs to get the kids to college and the adults to college, and there's a lot of money being funneled into college where we haven't properly funded our schools to where we don't have levies and all that.
So this was kind of a tactic because this failed last year. And they brought it back, but they snuck it into something that people were supporting because it's for children, and trying to get them on, but it was tucked in that. And even though people knew it, they still voted for it through in order to support the children. But now they can take those funds. Jim, and then Anita.
Quick question on schools. Oh, I'm sorry. You talked about tax entities not being able to use taxpayer money to solicit or advertise, is that what I heard?
Yes.
But would that prohibit school districts from using taxpayer money to promote their levies?
Yes.
Okay.
They can educate, but there's a fine line there, and many of them have crossed it, and literally, as we know, there's always people that abuse the system, and this is basically to push back on that.
Right. And the other thing is you said they moved the school board elections to the odd year in November. And my question is, why is it not wrapped up with general elections, true general elections like this November? Because we pay, I understand, upwards of, in this county, in this school district, BOSD, we pay upwards of $20,000 for these basically special one-issue election, school board levy, and things like that. And it's superfluous money, because if they roll it into a general election or a primary election, the infrastructure's already in place.
Correct.
It's because of the school lobby.
Okay.
It's because there's a huge lobby in Boise, and I'll make this quick, but I had a bill this year that basically said that once you run a levy or a bond, if it fails, you gotta wait a year till you rerun that bill. And everyone in committee loved it, even some of I think everybody except one person. And it flew out of committee, and it got to the House floor, and by the time it got to the House floor, the school lobby had put pressure on enough people that they were like, we ought to kill this bill or they're going to come after us. So they killed the bill, we reran it through, and we got levies gone and just bonds, and that passed. But then the House, then all the school lobby goes over to the Senate, and they basically stopped it in the Senate.
Okay, well, thank you for all you do.
So we have talked about that since we've been in there, and a little bit of the reticence to move in that direction of just having 2 election dates for everything is one, that it wasn't too long before we got in that they actually did that with everything but the school boards, the school levies and bonds, where now they can do 4 times a year, but also Ada and Canyon, because they're so large and have so many little sub-districts, to them it would be a nightmare. But all the other clerks within the state, when I was inquiring about this 2 years ago, are on board for the reasons you said. It saves the county's money, it's easier on the clerks, it's more efficient, plus, in my opinion, it upholds the sacred voting. I mean, this is the day we vote. These 2 days, we go to vote, everybody knows it, everything's voted on. There's nothing being snuck through with only special groups showing up to vote on things. So it's hard to ram that through sometimes. And maybe, because our approaches are a little different, maybe combined then we can get to that point at some point. But I'm still nibbling at that, trying to find the direct point of contact. And Ada County carries a lot of weight, unfortunately. Their deputy clerk's very well respected, and it's hard to get past that sometimes to do that. But that to me is the ideal, where everything's voted on at these 2 dates. Anita, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that already there is a mechanism in place by the school districts, by the school boards, to get around that law before it was even passed, to be able to use anonymous donations to their budget. It's in the budget, and last time they used, either last year or the year before, they used a $12,000 donation to send out letters to the public to support the levy. So we were trying to get to the bottom of this, trying through public records requests, and to find out who is this anonymous donor that is putting money into your budget so you can then use it to get a levy passed. And we were denied.
This should stop that. These bills should stop that, I believe. I think so.
Yeah.
If it's in their budget, it should, yeah.
Yeah.
So it would have to
It
be
is.
independent expenditure.
They have
I
a
vaguely
whole-
remember that.
They have a whole section in the school budget that deals with donations. And they don't necessarily have a name to them, so we don't know who's putting the money in. But my actual question was, when do all these laws take effect? Are they all July 1st?
Unless there's an emergency clause, which I don't think there were very many. I think there might have been one or two that had the emergency clause, in which case they take effect as soon as the governor signs them.
Okay.
Okay, your pick.
Sorry, Candy.
That's all right.
Mr. Engelhardt.
Back on the trespass law, if you know, has there been an increase in the development of private hunting reserves in the state?
I don't know that.
I don't know.
The only thing I've heard kind of circumspectly is a couple of brothers from Texas that bought a lot of property.
For the second time over 100,000 acres.
Right, and that's what they were using it for, and that's why so many citizens down there were angry about that. They've since opened up portions of it, I think, to stop such ire coming against them, but
that 10 acres is for you.
yes, that's the only instance that I kind of
I only
heard.
ask because in other states, that's what's happening.
Right.
More and more parts of the state have become private hunting preserves, large corporations, healthy individuals developing that, and then the stronger trespassing law just works in their favor.
But aside from that, remember that conservation easements do the same thing, except they take public funds to do it, as opposed to these people use their own private money to buy private property, so.
Well, and we have to remember too, the federal land that continues to be locked up from hunters. I mean, the roads that are closed are just, every year, that's always here, especially Boundary County, they just are closing so many roads down. That's our land that we should have access to, and not just the people that can hike. You know, what about the people that you know, old, are my age and older, we don't always want to hike all the way. Okay, so Candy.
It was to Sage, you mentioned the 555 and it was local tax, state?
Well, it would be personal income tax, corporate tax, and the sales tax.
Okay.
And I bet if you go on Congressman Labrador's gubernatorial website, it will probably explain that.
Okay. I was just thinking 999.
That's California. I know.
I like 555 better.
You serve with a hat.
I have a question. I asked it, this is the last one, I'm gonna ask it again. In all likelihood, you two are going to be reelected to another term. And I was wondering if you could tell us what your two most important characteristics of a next new senator is going to be, because you're going to be working with him.
That's a good question. It's not always easy to articulate. There's a lot of things that runs through your mind, and there's different dynamics when you're working with people about what is going to work and what is not going to work. But I think what I said earlier is upholding our form of Republican constitutional government is important to me, and appreciating that system. And oftentimes down there, it's easy to do different things, and leadership does different things sometimes that don't always adhere to the way that our system is structured and should be followed, even when we don't come out on the winning side of things. But having open discussions, having everything up for vote, we're elected to present legislation, not the executive branch, which we haven't talked about. Oftentimes agencies bring legislation before committees, and it's a bee in my bonnet. if I can use a safer term than what I was talking about earlier. Because that's what we're elected to do. So if they have something that they think needs to happen that's within their purview, they need to go, Representative Scott, here's my idea. Will you present this for me? Or then Representative Dixon, if she doesn't want to. And if no legislator's interested, well then, I'm sorry, but that is our role. So somebody with that perspective of following the way our structure was intended to be and not the manipulation that often occurs. Heather's far more vocal than I am about those things, but that manipulation happens. And just being willing to have that open discussion. I think the Senate's different than the House. The House is a little more rowdy. The Senate's more formal, and it's structured a little different. So you need somebody that can integrate in that system well, but still push up against the traditions that aren't as open as our system should be.
So my response to that, briefly, I'll try to keep it brief, is so for 3 years, I have been pushing and been very vocal on the broken system, because the first 3 years, none of our liberty ideas were heard at all. And so this year was a complete change. I have some ideas why that change came about, but almost every one of our liberty bills was heard this year. We had over 28 bills that we were pushing. These are good bills. These aren't, and remember, you got to pass a bill to get rid of a bill, you know. So these were, you know, reducing the size of government, more transparency, lowering taxes. Many of the, almost, I don't know, maybe at least half of those bills made it out of committee, which for the first 3 years, we weren't even given a hearing. They were locked in committee drawers. Half of them got out of committee, probably 10 of them passed the House floor, maybe even more. And of that, 5 or 6 actually got put into law, but there was probably 10 bills that got locked in committee drawers and in the Senate. And so it shows me that, you know, maybe we fixed this. We did this year. It's fixed on the House side. In my opinion, it's working okay. But I want someone on the Senate that's going to demand that those bills are heard and demand that those committee chairmen expose it to the citizens. I mean, I guess they don't really have much say in their calling, but what I want is someone to educate the citizens that, hey, this is going on in the Senate now. And here's what's happening, and your voice is being locked in this drawer. So I want someone that understands the Constitution, that's not afraid to stand up, and that's not going to get starstruck by the way they treat you down there. Because what they do, they wine and dine you, and I've said this many times, you know, they take you to all these fancy dinners, you're just always the funniest person anymore, everybody wants to be around you, and there's a lot of people that are not grounded, and if you are not grounded and you start falling for their hooks, lines, and sinker, you're done. Once you start compromising and going down that road, you know, just one little, what's the thing, if you just get 1% off course, you're way off.
1 degree.
1 degree off course, you're way off by the time you end up at the end, and we see that, and what we are finally getting rid of is a 22-year career politician who has been, and I don't mean this to be mean, but she's been the lowest voter below all the Republicans and all the Democrats, dead last, and she's Republican. And so it's about time we have some representation in the Senate, and it's time North Idaho gets heard in the Senate. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. Sorry, I get fired up because I'm very excited.
Will,
I believe I read that out-of-state internet vendors are going to be collecting Idaho's sales tax. Is that just the 5 or 6%, or are they going to be obligated to pick up the local option taxes and will submit those to all the cities and stuff? How is that going to work? What's the plan?
I do not know the specifics of that, Will. I'm sorry, it's a good question. It was restricted to those that have a presence within Idaho already, which helps a little bit, but I'll find out for you. I don't know unless you know.
I am pretty sure it's not going to be the local, because right now the state's not even collecting for the local. So Sandpoint, because I've dealt with some businesses here in Sandpoint that the city's saying they owe this 1% and they're saying they don't owe it, and the state's like hands off. They're not getting involved. So I don't see that they're going to do that with out-of-state vendors when they're not even doing it in the state for these local option taxes. That's my guess. Although that being said, Idaho, I don't know if I said it in here, so if I did, just stop me, but they're starting to consolidate all their data, all their addresses, they're starting to cross-reference it, they're saying it's, in the name of security, they're consolidating 8 groups and agencies under the executive branch. As that happens, when they get more and more efficient, maybe they'll be on to something like getting into the local options, but we're kind of behind the times, which is okay sometimes. Sometimes it's not, but I don't think they will. But Sage will find out for sure, and then he'll let me know, right?
Tell everybody else. Yes, sir.
First, I want to say thank you to both of you. Appreciate what you do. I was wondering if one of you could articulate the status of Idaho's firearms nullification law.
Can you?
Which law is that? I'm sorry, it's a little bit broad, unless you know something.
I think we passed a law a while ago. If the feds try to do something,
Right.
we would not.
Right, so our local sheriffs don't have to enforce if the feds are requiring, say, collection of firearms or something, they can refuse that.
Is that still on the books? Because I heard that was, the House either voted to nix it or it was repealed.
As far as I know, it's still on the books, unless, I can't imagine that getting through.
Is that a choice that the sheriffs have? Or is there a,
Actually, I think they're not supposed to. I don't think it's a choice.
It was
well, the way you
passed
said it,
before we got into
made me
office,
wonder.
And I think I read an email that somebody said
Right,
that.
that's probably me.
Okay.
I asked
And I
you.
probably didn't respond because I didn't know, right?
Right.
Okay, sorry. So I had never heard that until I got that email, and I didn't really follow up on it, because since we've been in, I don't ever remember, and any time the feds kind of push back, as you see this year, there's all this federal stuff on guns. What did we do? We passed 4 really good gun bills. I mean, I don't know, did we mention the kids one in the schools? Okay, so we've passed 4 good gun bills. That's not gonna
I would be shocked if
I would
something
be
snuck
shocked.
through.
I even saw the vote, I was actually at Renco, and she pulled it up, and he showed me the vote, that it was in February after the Florida shooting that the House supposedly voted to nix it.
Do you know the bill number?
I don't.
Okay.
And it didn't say anything about the Senate or the governor, it just said that he had to vote like a 25 to 49 vote or something like that. It said the House voted to get to repeal it.
It would never, I can't even see it happen. It hasn't
No.
happened in the 4 years we were there.
Well, in February, you
Yeah,
would
that would have
say.
been February of this year.
Then no, it didn't happen.
Okay.
No.
I'm just trying to think of what might be being misconstrued, that we did vote on it, somebody may think that's what it was, but everything's been really strong gun legislation that we've done. There was, the instances I talked about where they talked about restricting gun ownership, those are 2 things. One didn't pass and one did, but I think that was February, that was probably in March. I'll dig, and I'm sure.
I
got
think
that
that's
Sunny Day report.
misinformation, and I'll look in the Sunny Day report. The one gun bill that was restrictive, it did not pass. It was saying that if someone did domestic violence and they were charged of a misdemeanor, their guns would be taken for 2 years. And that one almost passed, which was scary, but it did not pass, and it's actually unconstitutional. So I think if it would have passed, our Constitution, I'm trying to dig it up and I can't find it, basically says you cannot, it says, nor shall any law permit the confiscation of firearms except those actually used in the commission of a felony. So even if that bill would have passed, I think it would have been fought big time, because you can't take a gun from someone because they do a misdemeanor.
But I will look into that, I'm sure we both will, because that's very curious to me that would come out.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Idaho governor signed the S 1332 in 2014, so that's the nullification of federal gun laws.
Okay, 2014?
In 2014.
Right.
S 1332.
So then we haven't passed anything since then, because we've been in office 15, 16, 17, 18. So that would.
Those passed, I'm looking here, 34-0 in the Senate, 68-0 to 0 in the House.
nullification
In
one?
2014, the nullification bill, so I doubt
And we've
that
gotten a little more conservative since
unanimous.
It's fake news, fake news.
No, it's good that you're paying attention and concerned.
Yeah.
It just concerns me what's being construed like that.
Yeah.
Hopefully we weren't fooled, I doubt that.
With all
Just at school.
the good laws that you guys have been passing in this session, I think it has really irritated environmentalists and liberals.
Oh, darn.
And this is pretty serious because we got a list of all the people who have registered as Republicans since last December, right on through the beginning of April. And it has about 300 names on it, and skimming through that list, we can immediately tell there are huge numbers of radical environmentalists and liberals that we know are generally, not in our camp. And they are registering in droves as Republicans because they want to swing the primary for not only getting candidates that are not as conservative as them, but to get Scotch and Pete's. So I just want you to know that we need to get the vote out in this primary to make sure that doesn't happen.
Can you say that louder so the camera will pick it up?
Pardon?
Can you say that louder so the camera will pick it up? Hold on, let me turn it on you. Say that again, Anita.
So because of this concerted effort to get, to motivate turnout from the liberal side, we have to motivate the turnout from the conservative side.
Get out and vote. That's right.
It is probably the last 4 weeks, there's going to be a ton of negative ads coming out, attacks. So I would encourage anyone, if they hear bad stuff about me, he won't about Sage, he doesn't have an opponent. But, and he's nicer than me. But if you hear something, please call me instead of asking others or spreading gossip, because I've had, it's really hurtful when you hear things like third or fourth hand and you're like, that's such a lie. Well, why didn't they call me? So I'm very available. I've got a number. Call me because I know they're coming. I got a call from a friend in Boise. They said, oh, they just endorsed your opponent and they're coming after you with their PAC money. I was like, oh, good. So it's coming, and make sure you call if you have questions.
Yeah, I'd like to underscore what Anita just said. So the last couple of weeks I've been going door to door doing some campaigning for Heather. And the doors that I've been going to have been predicated on registered Republicans who have previously voted in primary campaigns. So I'm not going to just random houses. These are registered Republicans who have previously voted in primary campaigns. And I have had people open the door. I've got my front hat on, and I'm saying, hello, I'm here on behalf of, actually Steve Bradshaw also, but I'm here on behalf of some folks. Do you have a moment to speak with me? No. If you're for that woman, I don't want to talk to you. There you go. So it's real. What you're saying is absolutely real.
Absolutely real.
We have a list of a lot of those people. We might save you some grief. But it's fun, to let people in first year at least hit them. Any more questions?
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate
Thank
Thank you all for coming. There's going to be another forum starting, I think, at 2:30. You're welcome to stay or come back. But I want to introduce our Vice President for Monarch County Republican Women, Monique Hutchins. She put all this together, and she's a big hand.
I'd really like to thank Sage and Heather for coming out and doing this for us, getting out in front of us and educating us as voters. Because Anita said it correctly, we do need to get out the vote. Without that, we're going to lose. And this is our last standing ground, folks. So please, educate your neighbors, educate your friends, ask them. Don't forget about May 15th. But I couldn't do a lot of this stuff if I didn't have people like Mike, from the Renegade Knights that have been here. They've provided us security. They're here early to help me set up. I can't do stuff like this without these gentlemen. And they've been at every one of my events. He called me at 8 o'clock this morning to apologize because he could only bring one helper instead of 3. So I want to give a big hand.
Well, one more thing. You all are invited. Our Bonner County Republican women have our general meeting this coming Tuesday, the 17th. It's at the Ponderay Event Center. We are having a forum for our local candidates. We do need an RSVP. Our cards are on the table with our website. You can RSVP by email. But please come and hear, take advantage of all the forums that are going on in town. It's so important to be educated and to know what's out there so you can make a decision on your own. But thank you so much for coming today. Yes, Victoria.
We do have a Facebook page, and all of our events are on there, and you can RSVP through the Facebook page too.
Thank you.
And we do have, this is, I have to say, the largest RSVPs I've had for any of our events so far. So
it could fill up. So we only have a limited amount of space at the Ponderay Event Center. Starts at, the doors open at 10. The forum will start at 10:30 and be over by noon. So if you can make it that morning, we'd love to have you come and hear what's going on. Yes, ma'am.
Do you know exactly who's going to be
Yes,
there?
we do.
yes, ma'am. Out of all of the candidate races, we have invited county commissioners, we've invited our state legislators, we invited the Senate race, we also invited the assessors, and out of that, we only have so far, Bruce Hollett is not going to be there, he has to work, and Glenn Bailey will not be there. All the other, I know you're going to be there.
No, I won't be there. I've got an interim committee meeting, so I won't be able to make it.
Well, now I just found out he's not going to
Sorry.
be there. So.
Well, you don't have a phone, so it doesn't matter.
I know you're going to be there.
Heather will be there.
Yes. So I guess now we'll have 3 candidates that will not be there out of the entire race. So, and we will be taking questions ahead of time on cards because we will have so many candidates. So it won't be an open town hall ask from the, just like the last time.
Monique, is it gonna be questions like all the other bad forums where you have to ask one question for all the candidates, or you can allow individual questions?
You may ask individual questions, and I'm not one of those where because I will be moderating, and I will not censor your question or read it the way I want it to read. However you write it,
They do that?
clean, is how it's going to get read, okay?
And after being the widower for 4 years and seeing so many of these, I can tell you that those are the best forums when people can ask individual questions, because when they dilute the answers down to everybody answering, and you really, as voters, get nothing. So I encourage you to come to this and ask and educated questions.
And if you want to ask your questions ahead of time, you may email them to me. So if you think of it right now, you can email it. It comes straight to my phone. And I already have several people that have started emailing me questions because they don't want to wait until that day when they show up and forget what that question was. So while you're thinking of it, write it down, email it to me, and I will ask it. Dana?
Are you going to give the opportunity to someone who's obviously referred to or named in an answer to the
To rebut? Yes.
Your email address?
It is Monique, HUT@gmail.com. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. This is going to be fun.
We'd love to have a great turnout.
If I may real quickly also, right at 2:30 when we start, this will be a true debate forum. So the candidates will be asked a series of questions, but at the end, we have an opportunity for you to also. The only thing that I ask is that you do put them on a card, because we are recording this for airplay back on the radio next weekend. So if I can read your card, that will make it easier for it to be heard. So if you just fill out a card and just see to it that I get it before the end of the debate, so I can be sure to read those. We'll take extra steps to make sure that there's no redundancy, so we don't waste time. We have an hour and a half, and there's a lot of questions that already to be asked. But please stick around for that. I think we'll be very enlightening.
Thank you all for coming, and you're welcome to stay.